Hi, AP Psych friends. My name is Mrs. Sarah Ryan, and welcome to another edition of Psychology from My Kitchen. Today in class, we are continuing with Unit 9, Human Development. So in our past few videos, we've been talking about some different sections in development, looking at like motor development, for example, and in our last video, we talked about cognitive development, so like how the mind is going to develop. And today, we're looking at something that's known as, let me see if I can move my face so you can see it, something called psychosocial development. So psychosocial development is like personal development, personal achievement, if you want to think about it like that. And the main person involved in all of this is a psychologist by the name of Erikson. So Erik Erikson is looking at human development from a personal standpoint of how do we grow and change? What are some various stages that we go through personally as humans? And in psychosocial development, what Erikson is going to identify is that in each stage of life, that human beings are going to have like an issue. They're going to have a conflict. And that the major task of that developmental stage is to overcome the conflict, with the idea being that in order to become happy, successful, well-rounded human beings, we have to deal with this stuff. We have to deal with these conflicts. And that if not, that can set us up for problems later on down the line, that we're going to experience either a developmental issue like at that exact moment, or it can lead us to having issues later on down the road. So each of these stages of life, which you can see are the 8 stages, so some great alliteration going on here with Erik Erikson and the 8 stages of life. What you're going to need to know in AP Psych is that what are these different stages and what is the issue that is occurring in each stage. And so the issue is referring to that conflict. And again, I want to overcome the conflict. I want to have a good outcome because it can help me become happier and well-adjusted and, a better human being, that kind of a thing. So we start by looking at infants. And so during infancy, the issue at hand is what Erikson referred to as trust versus mistrust. His argument was that during infancy, children need to develop trusting relationships with caregivers. This is kind of harkening back to, why am I blanking? We talked about like attachment research. Why can't I think of that woman's name? That looking at attachment research and things like having secure attachments, insecure attachments. And so Erikson is making that argument that we should have a secure attachment, meaning that infants can trust an adult caregiver to actually take care of them, that their needs are going to be met, and that this is a foundation for basic trust, that I'm not left to fend for my own. I can depend on other people. I can trust adults and caregivers with feeding me and changing me and doing all these things that need to be done in infancy. And should that not happen, well, then I can have problems with my relationships as I grow older. And we actually know this to be true, that when infants don't have that secure kind of attachment, that the amount of love and care and things like that, and the physical touching that happens from like holding a baby and cuddling a baby, that when kids don't get that, they really suffer in the emotional attachments that they have to other people and the relationships that they can create as they get older in both romantic relationships as well as like familial relationships, so like having bonds with family members. So this is the big issue during infancy, trust versus mistrust. Then we go to toddlerhood. So toddlers, we're talking about between the ages of 1 and 2. We could argue that this might go like 2.5-ish, that kind of a thing. But regardless, we're looking at what was called autonomy versus shame and doubt. So now the issue is that toddlers start to figure out that they can do things on their own and they want to accomplish things on their own. And for parents, this can sometimes be a really frustrating age because that kid wants to put the shoes on themselves. No, they will feed themselves. No, I do it. I heard that from my kid, I don't know how many times. Like talking about buckling up a seatbelt and things like that in the car. No, I do it. Like that is total toddlerhood right there. Because what's happening is that this child is starting to figure out that they can exercise autonomy, that they are their own person, and that they can do things on their own, and that they have their own thoughts and feelings and things like that. And when we allow them to do that, they actually are going to become independent little human beings, which is what we want, even though it can be kind of, it is a bazillion times easier to just put the shoes on yourself and to just buckle it yourself. But they don't want that. They want to be doing things on their own because they're gaining that autonomy. If we don't, they start second guessing themselves. I can't do this. Mommy won't let me tie my shoes. I must not be able to tie my shoes. So now I'm going to give up trying to tie my shoes. That we want these kids to start building up that autonomy and that self-confidence in their ability to complete tasks on their own. Then we have the preschooler. The preschooler, in a lot of ways, is actually very similar. They are continuing to be autonomous, but now they're also taking the initiative. They're making the decisions on their own about what it is that they're going to do. So instead of like, no, I'm going to buckle myself in the seatbelt to begin with, now it's, no, I don't want to get in the car. I want to play with my tablet. You know, like that's more of the initiative kind of speak that's happening with the issue that they're dealing with. They're taking things on an independent route, but they're the ones who are making their decisions and they're letting it be known. And when they can't do this, when they can't carry out the plans that they had originally created, they feel really bad about themselves that, oh, again, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I shouldn't be doing these things on my own. And again, we want them to be doing that because we do want little independent people. Because if not, then, you know, we've got 16-year-olds who want their parents to still tie their shoes and they're never going to be able to cook themselves a meal and that kind of a thing. And that's where, you know, again, we want to push that initiative kind of element that these kids are going to want to do on their own. So then we come to the elementary school years. So you really are talking elementary school. So think like first grade through fifth grade a lot of times, maybe into sixth grade a little bit. But what starts to happen during this age, what's starting to happen during this age is that it's as if a light bulb goes off and kids start to figure out that they are different and that they are different from their peers. And that suddenly there is a whole lot of comparing going on. So in some ways, children will start figuring this out in terms of like socioeconomic status. This friend has a lot of things, this friend doesn't. You can think of this in terms of like racial or ethnic differences and cultural differences that are going to occur. This person's skin or hair looks different than mine does. This person eats foods that I'm not familiar with. So they're really starting to compare themselves to their peers. And in that comparison of themselves to their peers, it also looks at my abilities. And that elementary school age children start to realize that their abilities might not be the same as their friends, especially when it comes to things like academics, extracurricular activities like sports or gymnastics and dance, like those kinds of activities that kids are going to participate in. You know, it's like, this kid is doing so much better than I am. And so what you start to see happening with the elementary school age child is feelings of competency. Am I as competent as my peers? And children desperately want to be as competent as their peers. In fact, from an academic standpoint, this is actually where we start seeing children losing interest in school, which is really sad because really little kids, they love school. They think school is the coolest thing because they are learning all of this new stuff. It's very, very exciting. It's all new, it's all different, and so that's a big deal. And then in elementary school, when they start comparing themselves and they start becoming competitive, especially towards one another, the child who finds themselves not doing as well as their peers or standing out in ways that they deem to be unworthy, that they are going to start experiencing inferiority. I am inferior. I am not as good as my peers. And the reason for that is because they're starting to they want to be doing things on their own. They want to be seen as accomplished, and they're realizing that they might not be. In some ways, I mean, that's part of life, right? Like, not everyone is going to be the best in every single element that they ever try, but that doesn't mean that we take the joy out of that. And so that's a really big deal that's going to be happening in those elementary school years. But then we come to adolescence. And big star next to this, because that's where you guys all are, that you are in Erikson's stage of adolescence. And I can tell you a lot of times, if College Board's going to ask questions about Erikson, they like to ask questions about this particular stage. So notice that adolescence is referring to a time period that begins in your teens and actually goes into your 20s. And so this is a pretty big time span that we're looking at here in terms of the amount of life that's going to happen between the time you're 13 to the time you're 23. Like, that is a huge leap that you're going to be making in 10 very short years. And so the major conflict in adolescence is referred to as identity versus role confusion. Your major psychosocial task as an adolescent is figuring out who you are, which is so much more difficult than it sounds. That it is discovering what you are all about. Who are you? What are you good at? What do you want to do with your life? What makes you stand out in a unique and special and wonderful kind of way? That is identity. Where do I fit in this scheme of life? Who are my friends? Who can I rely on? Who do I create relationships with? That is all part of identity, and it can be very, very challenging. You have some people who, from a pretty early standpoint, they're going to be figuring out their identity. This is my group of friends. This is what I'm successful at. These are the classes that I like. This is what I want to do. And you know what, to that, that's great. Okay, it's really awesome when somebody figures out all of those things, early on. But for a lot of people, this is a journey, okay? And it takes a whole lot of experiences to really figure out, like, okay, yeah, these are my people, these are my friends, this is where I fit in. Or it takes a whole lot of trial and error of, this is what I'm good at, and this isn't. Like, it is joining different clubs, it is trying out different sports, it is engaging in different kinds of activities. Like, those are actually all really good things for an adolescent to do. And so anytime you see someone in your high school who, it's like they kind of jump around from friends, like they have this group of friends and this group of friends, and maybe their freshman year they're part of the soccer team, but then their sophomore year they stop doing soccer and they join band, and then junior year they are in the school play. Like, they kind of are making all these jumps. Do not discount that person. That's a person who is very strategically, they're figuring out who they are. And sometimes it takes a bunch of different changes like that to determine, like, this is what I'm all about. This is what I want to do. You should not knock a person who might not want to go to college right away, or declare a major right away, that they might want to, try out some things in the world. They're, that's a really big deal in terms of Erikson and psychosocial development, because the problem becomes, if I do not devote time to figuring out myself and what I am all about and what my identity is, I start suffering from what becomes known as role confusion. I'm really lost. I don't know what kind of job that I want to do. And so, because I don't know what I want to do, I'm just staying at home and playing video games all day long. And it's not like I have a desire to design video games or something like that. I just have no desire to really do anything else because I don't know what I'm good at. And I don't know what I could become passionate about. And I haven't tried anything. And as I might see all of my other groups of friends who kind of go off and start doing their own thing, I feel more and more like I don't fit in anywhere. And so you have a person who's starting to experience role confusion. And this is very serious. Role confusion can last years and years and years. And that this person, not figuring out what it is that they're going to make them happy, and to be, this kind of productive, happy citizen in their lives. And that actually is going to complicate our next stage. Young adulthood, which Erikson identifies as being from our 20s all the way through our 40s, still fit in there. That young adulthood and the major issue is known as intimacy versus isolation. I know, even from personal experience, that during high school, it might seem like you should have a boyfriend or girlfriend. Like having a romantic relationship might be something that you're really into, okay? And that's okay. But do you know the statistics on like high school relationships? They're not super great. Now, there's always going to be some kind of representativeness heuristic where, it it's something that you think, oh, well, this happens all the time, because I think about my own parents. My parents started dating when they were 15, and they've been married for 44 years now. Like, that is the exception, not the rule. One of the reasons why, like, early relationships from high school, even in early college to some degree, that they don't work out super well, because this person doesn't always know exactly who they are, right? Having an identity. I hear the phrase a lot about like, you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. That is so wrong, okay? That is a garbage sentiment. Instead, really what it's supposed to be is that I need to work on myself and who I am as a person before committing myself into a relationship with another person. Because what can happen with those early relationships, with people who are very young and who have not created this strong identity as to who they're going to be, that they match up with somebody who is on their same level, but then the relationship fizzles out as they change their identity, as they become more aware of who it is that they are. Who I was when I was 16 is not at all who I am now that I'm 36, right? Like those are two major different points in my life, and that's okay. But the point is here is that in my early 20s, now that I do know who I am and I do have this solid identity, now I am ready for a relationship. And in psychology, we recognize that relationships, romantic relationships with other people, are important. Okay, the idea like you're too young to be in love kind of a thing, not really true. That's not really what we mean to say. It's that you need to know yourself before you can commit to a really serious relationship with another person who also knows themselves and knows what they're all about in their life. And when those two things happen, we can create intimacy, both sexual intimacy as well as the social intimacy that happens from romantic relationships that we have with our partners in life. Whether that means that you get married or not, that you can create those kind of intimate relationships with other people. And when we don't have that, we do feel really isolated. We do feel very much alone, and that can become a really major focus for a lot of people. If it wasn't, you wouldn't have all of your internet dating sites, right? Like, there wouldn't be farmersonly.com. I mean, people, they don't want to be alone. They want to have partners in their life, or they want to have close social relationships. They want to have intimate relationships with other people. And when we don't have that, that becomes, this major fixture of our lives. But then we come to middle adulthood. So middle adulthood is often something that we associate with like the midlife crisis, which is kind of a separate sort of thing that people experience. So middle adulthood is actually all about the issue of generivity versus stagnation. So this is very likely where maybe your parents are kind of in the zone. They're in this middle adulthood sort of stage in their life where they have an identity, they know who they are, they know their passions, they have strong relationships with their people, all of those things might be going for them. And then they might feel as though they're no longer productive. Like the things that they have been doing with their life aren't as meaningful anymore. So, for example, they might have a career where it was fun and exciting at one point, and now it's just this huge drag, and they don't feel as though they're doing something worthwhile with their lives. The same can also be true of somebody maybe who's been really focused on their children. They had children when they were younger. They've watched those kids grow up. They aren't being needed as much anymore. And then it suddenly feels like, well, now what am I going to do? I can't just spend the whole day cleaning the house. Like, how am I being a productive citizen of the world? And that's what generivity is really talking about, that I am contributing. I am doing something that is worthwhile and meaningful, not only for me, but for other people. And when I don't have that, I feel like a very strong lack of purpose, right? What do I do with my whole day that I'm not contributing, I'm not making things better? And so it can be like a midlife crisis where the person experiences something really tragic and terrible that, shines a light on whether or not they're actually being productive in their lives. But it could also just mean that this person's like, you know what, I'm going to switch careers, or you know what, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to learn something else because I've always wanted to do this and I didn't have the opportunity, and now I feel like I'm not doing something meaningful with my life, and I want to do something for me. This can go on until potentially somebody in their 60s and older. So the final stage, and this is kind of a blurry line here as to like the exact years, but in this final stage of life that is late adulthood, you might see late adulthood happening later and later for people as people are becoming older. And so this could be something that doesn't happen until the person turns 80, for example. But towards the end of life, that a person is still developing. Okay, a person is still changing and being who they are. And according to Erikson, their new issue is the final years of their life. That I am going to end the final years of my life with either integrity or with despair. And integrity is where I feel a sense of satisfaction, that I have done all of the things that I wanted to do, that I am content with my life, I am content with the things that have happened in my life, and understanding that I am coming to the end of my life, and that's okay, that I know that my body can't live forever, and I've come to terms with that I am going to know that I have done things that are worthwhile in my life. But if that's not happening, it is being in a state of pretty desperation. And some of you might know older adults like this. You might have grandparents, for example, who, one of your grandparents might be hopping about and going to bingo, and well, not during a pandemic, mind you, but they're active and they're engaged in their community and they volunteer and they do all this stuff. And then you might have another grandparent who it's like all they do is sit in their recliner and watch TV all day, and you hope they forget how to use the internet because otherwise they become a troll. And that, like, that nothing really good is happening. It's like the person is waiting to die and they're very, very unhappy. And Erikson is telling us that that's not how it's supposed to be, right? That's the issue at hand for this older adult. So Erik Erikson and the 8 stages of life. We have an issue that occurs in each of these stages, and we have to overcome that issue. We have to deal with it. And that this is kind of the recipe of being a healthy, well-adjusted, happy kind of individual, is that you deal with this stuff. You handle it. You understand that this is part of life. This is part of developing. So until next time, thanks for joining me today. Have a good one.